With all the love that kids have for superheroes, it's kind of strange that Disney have never attempted to cover the superhero genre in any of the animated films, especially now that they own Marvel. Pixar finally gave us the first true family superhero film with The Incredibles. It was a family film in the truest meaning of the word, because it features an entire family of superheroes. That alone made me want to hug this film. Can you honestly think of another superhero story where it's an entire family? I mean, I guess in the Fantastic Four, Sue and Johnny are brother and sister, and Reed and Sue are married later on. But you know what I really mean is a mother, father, and kids. I certainly can't think of anywhere else that this has been done, and Google appears to agree with me, so I'm going to call it right here. This is the first true superhero family story. But Pixar didn't just take a superhero story and just make it a family. These characters are most definitely a family first. They just happen to have superpowers. But at the same time, we see in the prologue sequence that Bob and Helen were once supers that were forced out of this life simply because the good deeds they did had unfortunate side effects. It's interesting that Bob mentions in the opening sequence that he would like to settle down at some point and start a family, while Helen completely dismisses this idea. But then when we move forward 15 years, Bob is the one trying to relive being a superhero, and Helen is the one trying to let it go and live a normal life. The story definitely has quite a clear 3-act structure, with also a prologue and a very brief epilogue. The first act covers Mr. Incredible's obsession with living in the past. The second is him getting that opportunity, together with Helen and the kids going after him. And the third is just all-out superhero action. Now let's talk about what really drives this film. These characters. To begin with, you have the family. This is the most well-written family I have ever seen. The dialogue between these characters feels so natural, exactly how I feel a real family would fight if they just happened to have superpowers. There is someone in this film for everyone to relate to. The dad, the mum, the son, and the daughter. Oddly enough, though, on a personal level, I think I actually related more to Violet than to Dash. I was a lot more like Violet at school. I was very much a loner, not really wanting anything to do with anyone else, and just wanting to blend in. That's Violet's character, summed up very well by her power to turn invisible and form force fields. But at the same time, she does want a certain boy to notice her, but lacks the self-confidence to do anything about it. In short, Violet, like her mother, just wants to live a normal life. And just as Violet wants the same thing as her mum, Dash wants the same thing as his dad. He does want to be a superhero. He wants to be able to use his powers to express himself and achieve something out of life. Except that it's worse for him, because unlike his father, he's never even had the chance to experience being a superhero in the first place. Then there is Frozone, Bob's best friend, who represents something of a middle ground between Bob's desire to be a superhero again and Helen's desire to just live a normal life and accept that those days are over. I think deep down, Frozone is more on Helen's side, but feels an obligation to do what Bob wants because Bob is his best friend. But the main thing I love about this character is the casting of Samuel L. Jackson. With all the yelling and arguing that goes on in this film, I am convinced that this character was created just so that they could have Samuel L. Jackson in this film. Because who does that kind of thing better than him? He even looks a bit like him. And hey, that scene where he takes a drink while being held at gunpoint is taken right out of Die Hard with Vengeance. They had to have been thinking of getting him when they wrote this character. Probably the best voice acting job is provided by the director Brad Bird, as fan favourite Edna Mode, who designs and makes the family's costumes. Most people love her tone of calling everyone darling, and her distinct design, but what I think I love about her is the way that she is eccentric, but also blunt in the way that she speaks to both Bob and Helen, and ultimately motivates them to do what they need to do. It's almost like she's their coach. Syndrome, meanwhile, is one of only 2 real all-out villains that Pixar have ever done, the other being Hopper. Man, is this guy egotistical. His main motivation is the frustration he feels from not having powers. He genuinely believes as a kid that he can help Mr. Incredible, but Mr. Incredible, quite understandably, doesn't feel like he needs help, especially from a kid without powers. But you kind of understand Buddy's frustration as a kid, and why he has grown to hate Mr. Incredible over time. He makes a good point about how it's only once he's become a threat that Mr. Incredible starts to respect him. As a result, he shows no mercy towards Mr. Incredible or his family, and we as the audience hate him for it, but also kind of understand why he's doing it. He isn't just showing no mercy simply because he's evil, he's showing no mercy because he genuinely believes Mr. Incredible had his opportunity 15 years ago and didn't take it. It's interesting how, unlike Mr. Incredible, He's had to work to become formidable, inventing things like hover boots and robots and telekinetic gloves. Normally in stories like this, it's the villain that has been handed everything, and the hero that has to work for everything. I can't really think of another hero-villain story that's done it like this. The only thing I really had a problem with is his ultimate goal. He wants to pretend to be a superhero? Why? Why not actually be a superhero if that's the kind of attention he wants? He is most definitely one of the best villains in a superhero film I've ever seen, as well as having one of the best deaths, even if it was remarkably similar to the death of the villain in Die Another Day. But I'm sure that was just a coincidence. The action in this film is as good as any superhero film. They really get creative with Elastigirl's ability, using the fact that it's animation. But I think my favourite part is the rolling ball that Violet and Dash combine to create. And at the same time, we have some great comedy with the family arguing in the same way any family would. They may be superheroes, but they are still a family, and like any family, they fight. It's also kind of cool that they don't go down the whole damsel in distress road, with Bob being the one that has to be rescued, not Helen. So what are the bad things in this film? Well, like I said, I don't really know if I like Syndrome's motivation. It seems more like he's just jealous of real superheroes for having powers. But he could easily have been a superhero himself, just one that doesn't have powers. The real problem for me comes from the fact that he is a good person when we are introduced to him. So where does this evil nature to his character come from? Is it all just as a result of Mr. Incredible's rejection of him? But then, why would he kill all the other supers? I don't like the way that Frozone is absent from the second act. With all that action on the island, there is so much he could have added to that. That little anecdote he has, where they make fun of the supervillain cliché where they don't stop talking, was nice. But it was a little ruined by the fact that they do it again later on with Syndrome's line, "You caught me monologuing." I don't really get why Dash would want to take up sprinting. I mean, for someone who possesses super speed, where is the challenge in that? Why not take up football or baseball? Sports where he can use his speed but also needs other skills. While I do like Violet's character arc where she slowly becomes more self-confident during the film, something about it felt a bit incomplete to me. There's that scene where she fails to set up the force field around the jet, and later on Helen apologises to her and tells her it's okay, but after that it's kind of forgotten about until the very end. But the biggest problem I have with this film is, where the heck is a sequel? I wouldn't normally want a sequel to anything, no matter how good the original is. But in the case of the superhero genre, I do feel that they are something of a necessity. Once you have the origin story over with, you can really let rip with a fully fledged superhero-based story. Pixar have been doing a lot of sequels lately. Cars 2, Toy Story 3, the upcoming Monsters University, although technically that's a prequel, and even Finding Nemo 2. But so far, no word on a sequel to the one film that is by far the most suited for a sequel. Heck, I could write a draft for a sequel to this right now. This film is close to 10 years old now, so how about setting the sequel 10 years later? Jack is in 4th grade, Dash and Violet are in high school, and Bob is head of his company, while the 5 of them have been working together as superheroes for the last decade. There are so many things you could do with that setup. If nothing else, you could just explore how Violet, Dash and Jack have adapted to using their powers. This is a bit like the 2009 Star Trek for me, in that it was a great ride, but it won't really feel complete until I see the sequel. Come on, Pixar, make it happen. So overall, this film is just packed with great stuff. The dialogue between the family is taken right out of a typical family show. It's natural and hilarious at the same time. The action is fun and creative. You really root for this family as a whole, but also see them as individuals. And the villain is truly evil. As you just heard, it left me begging for a sequel. Reviewing this was kind of like when I reviewed the MLP episode Hurricane Fluttershy, in that I knew it was good, but I don't think I realised just how good it was until I sat down to review it. I was expecting to give this film an 8 out of 10, but after really thinking about it, screw it, I'm giving it a 9.